Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him, gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. And everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was actually given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah. Now, Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David. And when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I'll give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." So Saul said to David, "Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." Saul ordered his attendants, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king likes you, his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law.'" They repeated these words to David, but David said, "Do you think it's a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm just a poor man and little known." When Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied, "Say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Now Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. And when the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. And then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. This is the word of the Lord. Now, as Pastor Dick said, it's going to be a long journey for David to sit on the throne. He knows it's going to happen. That's what's in his future, but it's going to take a long time for him to get there. And I got to thinking, why is this God's plan? Why isn't it like, this week David kills Goliath, the Philistine. The next week Saul's out of the picture and David becomes king of Israel. No, that's not God's plan. Actually, between David's victory over the giant and the time where he will become the king of Israel is actually going to be a many, many years long journey. And this is part of how God works. And we're going to see over the next couple months, this is part of God's process to prove and to test David, to show us what David is really made of, to prepare David for this role and to convince us this is the kind of king that we need. And also we're going to see that this is also a way that we see God's glory shown through David's weaknesses. See, if David had just won this awesome battle and everybody was amazed and cheering for David, singing the David song about killing tens of thousands of Philistines, and the next week David is installed as king, right? He just kind of rolls into that victory. Everyone's just going to be really, really impressed with David. And amazed, like, wow, David's an awesome guy. David is so good at everything, that's why he's the king. No, instead, we're going to have this long time where it seems like David is very much vulnerable, where he's actually very weak, where he's actually about this close to dying over and over and over. And he doesn't look like a champion. He doesn't look like a hero. He looks like a guy he's a refugee. He's a fugitive. He's just barely making it. And out of that weakness, God will win his great victory through David. You see, this is part of his plan. Just like we saw that with his victory over Goliath, right? When David faced the giant, he won out of weakness, right? It was so obvious that day that the person that looked weaker was triumphant. We said the reason for that is God likes to demonstrate his glory through the means of human weakness. God's glory is so obvious when he uses a weak vessel. Everybody could see that David didn't win that victory by himself. It was so obvious that it was the Lord that had done it. So God's glory was shown all the brighter because of that. And that's not just going to happen in the David and Goliath story. That's going to happen today. It's going to happen next week when we see David. It's going to happen the week after that. Again and again, it's going to be weakness triumphing over what appears to be the strong side. And friends, it's the same thing is true in our Christian life. Now, a lot of us know that, when we first come to Christ, we're like, yes, when I got saved, when I became a Christian, that was all of God's grace. I brought nothing to the table except for my sin, and God graciously forgave me of my sin, and he made me a Christian in spite of what I am. That's how it started. But after that, it's pretty much been me being a hero and living the Christian life. No, actually, you know what your Christian life is going to look like? It's going to look a lot like what we're going to see in David's life over the next few weeks. If you're looking at your Christian life, or you're like, why does my life look like this? If I'm a Christian, shouldn't I be sort of like a champion, just like crushing every battle that comes? And shouldn't I be like this sort of like larger-than-life superhero figure? No, your life is going to look a lot like David's. It's going to look a lot like very close to failure, very close to danger, all kinds of heartache, all kinds of trials and troubles. That's God's plan to show his glory through your life. So don't panic as if something has gone wrong. As we'll see in David's life, it's part of God's plan to mark the lives of his people in this pattern. So let's look at the story. Saul is afraid of David, and yet he can't live with David, and he can't live without him. So he needs David to fight his battles. So what he does is he puts David in charge of a military unit and sends him out to go fight. And he thought, well, if David lives, then he'll be defeating my enemies. And if he loses, that solves my David problem, right? Win-win. So he sends David out to fight his battles for him. And what we're going to see in this passage is the futility of resisting God. If you see, the very first verse we read said Saul was afraid of David. And look at verse 29, one of the last verses we read. It says Saul became still more afraid of him. And he remained his enemy the rest of his days. You know what Saul's going to do for the rest of his life? Try to mess with David. That's like all Saul is going to do for the rest of his life is try to make war against David. He's going to use all of his powers to do it. It's not going to work. So we're going to see today the futility of fighting against God's purposes. God wins no matter what. And his purposes always succeed, are always victorious. And that means it's a fool's errand to try to stand in the way of God's work. We'll talk later about how we might do that today, how you and me, people like us, in 2026, may try to stand in the way of God's purpose in this world. So David's given this battalion. He's sent out to fight these dangerous battles. And David is just out there doing good deeds. I mean, this is like, he is a hero for Israel. He's out there fighting all of these battles, defeating the Philistines. And this was a very serious problem. We can forget about this as we live in a country that's pretty secure. We saw the last 24 hours, a country on the other side of the world with that's being disrupted with bombs dropping on it, and it probably didn't even cross your mind. Like, oh, I wonder if something like that might happen here. Like, we live in such a secure, very strange in the history of the world that we live in such a secure place where honestly you're not even stressed about that probably even a little bit. Okay? But the people of Israel, they understood that kind of stress. They knew that kind of a fear. They lived in a world that any day a raiding band of Philistines could appear on the horizon and your life was over and your family would be obliterated and you'd be impoverished. That was normal for them. So to have a guy like David who's out there roving around with 1,000 soldiers, just laying waste to the Philistines and chasing them off the land, that was a very exciting thing for them. David is going about doing good deeds for Israel, and here's Saul plotting his demise. Now think about the darkness of that. Here's the guy who's fighting God's battles on their behalf. And Saul, whose side is Saul on in his heart? Who's he cheering for when David goes out to battle? Saul is kind of on the Philistine side. The Philistines want David dead, and Saul wants David dead. You see the darkness of Saul, that in heart he's pretty much on the same page as the Philistines. He sees the world kind of the way a Philistine does. And ultimately, this will be the end of it. Look at verse 17, where we already read this, where Saul said, I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that. Verse 25, the last little sentence there says, Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. So you see, Saul and the Philistines are united in purpose. They want to bring David down. And this is true darkness. And friends, you see this today in our world as well. There's a lot of people that look like they're pretty good people. Like Saul looked like he was a pretty good person. Look religious. They look moral. They're not a scandal to their neighbors. Everybody thinks of them as a very normal person. But in their heart, they're cheering for the wrong side. There is a war going on in our world, friends. There are two sides. Our goal is not to be united with the world. Our goal is to recognize that there is a battle in our world between good and evil. And it's a very remarkable thing. One of the features of social media in our days is that you can usually see who somebody's cheering for. They put it in their bio, they post about it, they post stories about it, who they're liking, who they're retweeting, etc. You get a real good idea of whose side someone's on. And there are people who, like I said, like King Saul, look to all external appearances like they're perfectly normal, good, citizens or whatever. But there's clearly something wrong because they're constantly cheering for the side of evil. And I think that they may mean well. I think they simply cannot tell the difference between good and evil. And that is because of a deep inner dishonesty about their own moral condition. A deep inner dishonesty. And I think you see that with Saul, as we'll see in a little bit. Saul is unrepentant. He is committed to his sins. And he cannot and will not examine himself. Saul is completely fixated on David, and he will not stop and look at his own heart, because if he did, he knows, right? He knows what he would find. He would find a heart full of sin that refuses to repent. And the same thing is happening in our world. Some of the people that are most agitated, they're always, ranting, and they're upset about all these people they don't like. A lot of times there's a real refusal to turn an eye and look at their own heart, as King Saul is here. Now, by his victory over Goliath, if you remember this little part in the story of David and Goliath, there was like a promise the king had made that if whoever defeated Goliath would marry the king's daughter. So the fact that this is even being negotiated is kind of dishonoring to David. This should have been a done deal. Now you're like, well, Saul offered, but David said no. Yes, in their culture, even in our culture, in case you don't know this, like it's considered polite to refuse if somebody offers you a really great gift. You should at least try to make some show of being like, oh, no, that's okay, that's too much, I can't take that, that's too great of a gift, right? You should do that, kids. If somebody offers you something, don't just greedily grab it and say, thanks. You should have some, slowness to accept it. That's a sign of humility. And their culture was much stronger like that. So when Saul says, all right, David, here's my daughter. A deal's a deal. You can marry my daughter. David says, who am I that I should become the king's son-in-law? That's too great of a thing. And Saul dishonors David by saying, okay, you can't say I didn't offer. And immediately giving his daughter to somebody else. You see, Saul, we still have this tension where Saul really does not want to bring David into his family. He doesn't want David as a son-in-law. He doesn't want David to be that close. So it's a dishonoring. And you see David's humility. Kids, notice David's attitude as he responds to that. That he doesn't think of Saul as his enemy. He doesn't get resentful as soon as somebody, oh, you said you were going to do this for me, and now you didn't do it for me, and now I'm all upset about it. No, David wasn't like that. David really did feel that humble. He did not feel worthy to be married to the king's daughter. So David humbly declines, and he humbly deals with this, this show of disrespect from Saul. David, he knows his destiny, but he also knows the time is not yet. And so he accepts the low position of a servant and does not exalt himself. And this is important for us because Christians, we live in an in-between time. Every Christian here, every one of my brothers and sisters, you are future kings and queens. You are made to be kings and priests to our God. Right? There is no higher destiny. You pick out the person in this world with the highest status in all the world, and you are destined for a much, much higher status than that person. I don't care if it's a president or a billionaire or a celebrity. You, Christian, are destined for a much higher status than that. And yet, look at you today. You got anything like that status, right? You're not anywhere close to that. You also are in an in-between time. Like David, you know what your destiny is, and you're not there yet. It's not time for that. And that means you're going to have to deal with a lot of disrespect. and a lot of dishonor, a lot of unfairness that's going to happen along the way. And David humbly receives that as something from the Lord. Now, this means, when I say that David doesn't try to exalt himself, I want to be careful there. Some of us suffer from a kind of humility sickness that I think afflicts a lot of Christians. There's a good thing called humility, and then there's another thing that we call humility that is really not a virtue, actually. The virtue of humility says, I'm not going to exalt myself. And what that means is, I will not impatiently or faithlessly, in disobedience to God, do what is wrong to get ahead. Okay? It is not wrong, it is not a lack of humility to try to get ahead for yourself, for your family, and your job, and your school, or whatever, to try to do as good as you can, to try to climb up, to try to better your family and better your position in this world, to try to get that promotion, to try to upgrade some stuff. Like, that's not wrong. That's not a lack of humility. That's not what the Bible is talking about. It says if someone fails in humility, they have pride. The layer of pride is where you do what is wrong. You disobey the Lord to try to get ahead for yourself. That's a wrong kind of ambition. There's a good ambition. Later on, David actually will fight to become the king. There actually comes a time where David thinks, oh no, I'm going to be the king and I'll fight you for it. But David knows that's not this day. This day, it's not his time to be the king, and so he's going to patiently wait. He will not do what is wrong. We're going to see that again and again. David will have opportunities to do what is wrong, to try to seize what he thinks rightfully belongs to him. And again, David will say no to that. And that in itself is all the message that some of us need to hear today. That we must not do what is wrong to get what we think we have coming to us, or what is fair for us. Now, Saul sees that his younger daughter, Michal, is attached to David. She is in love with David. And Saul says, okay, you know what? I think I can use this for my advantage here. He says, I know David can't afford to pay. Back then you'd pay this price to marry somebody's daughter. And that, it's a sign of respect and to show how much you valued the daughter. And David is a poor man, and he certainly cannot afford to marry a princess. And so David is interested in marrying the king's daughter. He knows that's what he deserves. You see, David, he has that ambition. He is saying, yeah, I would like to be part of the king's family. But he also knows he can't afford this, and it would be anything he could offer would be an insult. He's like, I could give you like $50. Is that like that's going to be insulting to Saul? He's not going to offer that. And so Saul says, you pass it down, and all he wants 100 dead Philistines. You get 100 dead Philistines, she's all yours. David says, that's great. That's wonderful. I'll get you 200 dead Philistines. Now, Saul's plan is what? Saul's plan is to force David into a battle where he'll be killed. Now, in case you know, it's actually a very dangerous thing to set out in a battle and say, today I want to kill X number of people. Now, the reason why is because usually in a battle, when things start going bad for the other side, what do? They turn around and run away, right? And so if you say, no, I have to kill 100 of them, or I have to kill 200 of them, you're going to be forced to pursue them into an unfavorable battle situation. You're going to have to storm a fortress or something like that. So Saul is counting on David, putting himself in a bad situation to try to pay for to his daughter to wed his daughter. Now, it's kind of a strange thing here. It says in the passage that he's going to kill 200 Philistines and bring back their foreskins. It's important to realize that for Israel, they saw the world in two groups. They saw the world as circumcised and uncircumcised, as clean and as unclean. Now, we still use this distinction in the world that we talk about moral wrongs in the terms of cleanliness or filthiness, right? We talk about a dirty politician or a dirty deed or dirty money, right? Or a dirty talk, right? We talk in those same terms, use the terms of pollution or uncleanness to talk about a moral thing. And that's a way of saying it's unacceptable to us. It's unacceptable to us. And for Israel, they had this mark in their lives that said this is what separates the world into clean and unclean. And friends, it's very important that we don't misunderstand the Philistines here. I think sometimes we look back at maybe a few generations back, and we're like, hey, it seems like people a few generations ago where people were more moral, more upstanding. They were better people than they are today. Oh, so it must be if you go back even further, they were even more moral and even more upstanding. And if you go back 1,000 years, they must have been super people compared to us. No, that's actually not how it works at all, especially in the Old Testament times. You're talking about these pagan nations. We as moderns can barely conceive of the filthiness, of the evil, of the cruelty and the violence, of the wicked superstitions, of the bloodthirsty gods that these people serve. We barely can understand. Like, we would barely recognize these as fellow human beings. They're so evil. That's what we should think about when we read about the Philistines. We should think about like the worst monsters that you've ever seen depicted in like movies or something like that. These were people that carried around moral filth. And even today, we still have this in the news, some truly horrific crime. If you've ever felt this in your heart for 1 second, then you know what's going on. Have you ever heard about a crime like in the news that was so horrific, that was so gruesome, that was so wrong that when you heard it, you said in your heart something like this: there is nothing to do except to expunge that person from the world. Such a person needs to just be deleted. They need to be scoured off the face of this earth. The world is filthy if this person walks on it. Our world needs to be set free, purified from the presence of such a person. If you've ever felt that, that is something the way like Israel looked at all nations around them, and not for no reason either, for a very good reason. When they looked around them in the world, that's what they saw. And so David says, I am only too happy to go out there and clean the place up. I love scouring the land of the unclean, of the Philistines. So Saul's not even thinking about that. Saul's not even thinking about what kind of people the Philistines are. He's like, I just want David to be killed by those people. But David says, this is the kind of mission that I like. I like the missions where I go out there and I scour the land of the unclean Philistines. So that's what David goes and does. He cleanses the world of this pagan, immoral cesspool. And David, frankly, will be doing that the rest of his life. We'll read more and more stories about David. And what you'll find is this is always the kind of stuff that he's doing. He never finishes this job as long as he's alive. So David takes the deal and he wins the bride. He proves himself worthy to be a prince. And this only makes Saul more afraid. And he sees that everything that he does only brings David greater glory. Now, why? Verse 28. Saul realized that the Lord was with David. Up in verse 14, saw the same thing. In everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. What is David's secret? The Lord is with David. That he's not alone. In all of his troubles, in all of his battles, he's not alone. There is someone with him. It is the Lord his God, working for and through him. Now, this is the great dignity and honor of Israel. What makes Israel different than all the nations in the world at the time? Well, what makes them different is the Lord is with them. Ain't nobody like Israel who has the Lord with them. And sometimes in dark days in Israel, it seems like the Lord has left, but then you see the Lord's presence almost concentrated or centered, enshrined in one person. And it's like that person has all the presence of the Lord. Like, we don't know if the Lord is with just Israel anymore, but he sure is with that guy. And what's happening there? The Lord is drawing all eyes, all attention to David. He says, you want to be with me? You got to get with David. You want to be with me? You need to follow David. Keep your eyes on David. I'm working through David. What do you need? You need David. What do you need? You need what David does. What David does is what I'm doing. I am working through David. David's works are my works. That's what is going on there. God is at work in the world. And so this is, remember what we've said for the past couple weeks. Over these chapters, everyone in Israel has to make a decision. Are you for David or are you against him? Are you for him or are you against him? And what this is saying is, if you're against David, I got bad news for you. You'll find yourself fighting against God. To resist David is to resist God. When God brings his great king on the scene, your job is to fall in behind him, to support him, to bow to him. David is destined to be the king who scours the land and brings peace. And this is a great, last week we saw how Saul, this is the measure, think of like Saul's frustration here. This is the measure of his like incapacity here. Saul wants David to be destroyed. And now he finds his son is David's best friend and swears a covenant to protect David at all costs. So Saul's like, okay, my son is totally in league with David, my enemy. And now in this one, he finds out now my daughter is married to him and my daughter is in love with David. Even Saul's own household. He's losing his own household as his children side with David against him. Now, they're going to see more about this next week. So this is a pattern that Israel should see. We've got to remember who's reading this book. We try to point this out from time to time. This book would have been written and read hundreds of years after David. There's no more David. So you're reading this book after David's dead and gone. What are you supposed to think? What are you supposed to do with this? You're supposed to say, if God ever brings another David on the scene, we better make the right choice. If God ever brings us another David, we better make sure that we don't act like Saul. If God ever brings us another David, we better be like Jonathan. We better be like Michael. We better be like those who received David and not like those who resisted him. And of course, that was the truth. One day, God was going to send a king in David's line. David's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. That's not an accurate number of greats, by the way. Rounded to the nearest. And this son of David would come to be the ultimate king. And just as David, the key to David's success was the Lord was with him. This king was even greater. His name, Emmanuel, meant God with us. And if it was true that everything that David did was really also the work of God, how much more was that the case with God's own Son? All of the works of Jesus were the works of God. And just as the way all eyes were meant to be fixed on David, as you realize the Lord was with him, all eyes were meant to be fixed on Jesus as we realize that he was the Lord among us, God's work in our midst, God's work for salvation for us. The presence of God localized, centered, concentrated in one person. His work was God's. And just like David in the story, we had David in this passage, what's he doing? He's running around doing good. Going from this town to that town, going into this battle, that battle. He went about doing good. Later on in the book of Acts, Peter is preaching to Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. And listen how he describes Jesus. And just think of what we just read in 1 Samuel. It's like the way he's describing Jesus sounds so much like David in this passage. Peter said, God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and power. And he went around doing good and healing all who were under the power of the devil because God was with him. See, it's the same pattern once again. Here's the king, God is with him, he's going around doing good for his people, and yet he was resisted by sinners and he was killed. And this is the important part, when Jesus is killed, it looks like he lost the battle that David won. Like David comes awful close, there's a step between him and death at times, and yet he's always victorious. But as we saw last week, with Jesus it's different because he's not just threatened by death. In the end, he actually is killed. It looks like he's not just resisted by the Sauls and the Philistines of the world. It looks like he's overcome by the Sauls and the Philistines of the world. But even there, he is victorious. And that, too, is part of his scouring the earth of sin and death. You see, the earth did not just need to be scoured of certain bad people. David did a real good job of scouring the earth of villains, of the bad guys. David was real good about that. Not a lot of criminals in the land in David's day. David was real good about, see, that guy, he's a bad guy. Let's get rid of him. Scour him. Get rid of him. But there was an evil. There's an evil that lurks in the hearts of every one of us. Way down deep in our DNA. And that kind of a stain is something David was wholly unequipped to scour. He could not scour it out of himself. And he prayed, oh God, create in me a clean heart. David looked in his own heart and he saw a little Philistine in his own heart. He said, there's something that needs to be scoured deep down inside. Wholly unable to do it. He could not do it. And that's what Jesus Christ came to do. And that's why he had to go to the cross. He was winning a different kind of battle He was scouring the earth of sin and death. Yes, the sin even that's in our own hearts. And that means to stand against Jesus is to stand against God's ultimate campaign to rid this world of sin and death and evil once and for all. There's this wonderful part in John chapter 12 where the Pharisees are a lot like Saul. King Saul, like here in this passage, what's King Saul's main mission? Got to kill David, got to kill David, got to kill David. When you read the book of John, there's these people in Israel called the Pharisees, and their whole thought is, got to kill Jesus, got to kill Jesus, got to kill Jesus. And they get frustrated because whatever they do, it seems like Jesus just goes from victory to victory, and God's glory is being shown, and people's eyes are being fixed on Jesus. This great part in John chapter 12, the Pharisees are getting frustrated. And they said to one another, look, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him. That's what we're going to see in the life of David. Whatever they do, it's in the end, no, everybody's just getting on Team David. And in the end, friends, what's going to happen in our world is it's all this resistance against Jesus. If you're on team resist Jesus, if you're not a Christian, just tell you where that's going. It's going nowhere. It's going nowhere. The whole world, in the end, will line up behind King Jesus. We're excited. Easter is coming. Just a month from now, we'll celebrate that victory of Jesus over death and over hell and over sin. And that was a wonderful victory of Jesus. And just I love this story about David. David wins a bride. It's a terrible price to pay. But David goes out and he slays these enemies, and he ends up with a bride that he purchased by winning this great battle. And the Lord Jesus Christ also had a bride to win. Had a bride to win, and he won her. And that bride, of course, is all of God's people. All of us here today, brothers, sisters, we are the bride of Jesus Christ, purchased by his great victory on the cross and at Easter resurrection. All of his people are his as a crown of honor. And we said last week that for David to have Jonathan as a friend was like a badge of honor. It's we already know Jonathan's a great guy. And as soon as Jonathan meets David, he's on Team David. So David kind of wears that as a badge of honor. You know what my friend is. Jonathan thinks the world of me. And now in this passage, we got another badge of honor for David. He says, you may have never heard of me. I am married to the king's daughter, though. Maybe you've heard of her. He wears this as a badge of honor. And we as God's people are a crown of honor and glory to our Savior. He takes us as a badge of honor. And even today, folks, people are resisting him. But as we learn from David, what do you learn? To resist God's purpose, to try to stop what God is doing in the world, is to fight against him. And it's not going to work. So how would somebody do that in 2026? Anybody who's trying to stop Jesus Christ from being the king of every person, of every corner of this world, anyone who's trying to stop Christ from being king is trying to stand in the way of a freight train. They're trying to stand in the way of God's purposes. In the book of Acts, again, another place, great little line, famous line in Acts chapter 5. There's it's a little inside look at Jewish people panicking as the gospel is being spread. There's a wise teacher there named Gamaliel. And they're all thinking, what are we going to do? We've got to kill these Christians. We've got to wipe them out. Something's going on. And listen to what wise Gamaliel says. If it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. What are the chances that somebody's going to fight against King Jesus and win? Well, it's about the same as the chances of anybody fighting against King David and winning. It's not going to happen because the Lord is with him. What are the chances that someone's going to resist God's purpose? That somehow this story is going to end with Jesus not being the king over all nations, the king over all creation. What's going to stop Jesus from having his bride at his side, having you and me with him? What's going to stop that? Nothing's going to stop that. If you try to fight that, you will find yourselves fighting against God. So let me just tell you, Christians, a couple things that you can take away from this passage today. First of all, we should remember and take some pride in the fact that we are the bride bought by Christ. You know, Michal was a precious bride. Her value was demonstrated in that price. Michal could say, I'm kind of a big deal. 200 enemies were killed so that somebody could marry me. David courted death. Great King David, he courted death to wed his bride. And the price David willingly paid was over and beyond what anyone could have thought such a bride was worth. Even Saul was like, she's a princess, but 100 guys, that's like the most I could ask, that you kill 100 people. David said, I'll give you 200. So let us marvel, friends, Christians, how we were valued. Far greater enemies were killed. A far more noble life was laid down. And a price infinitely more extravagant than we could ever have imagined was willingly paid down. All so that you could join hands with Jesus forever. Friend, you are far more greatly loved and valued by Jesus than Michal was by David. So how loved you are, Christian. See this and be overjoyed. Be humbled and be confident. Don't walk around with your self-esteem hanging on the affirmation of other people, whether other people recognize your value or not. Don't even feel the need to wish for their affirmation or whatever. Recognize that you're that loved by such a king, that such a price was paid for you. How could you ever feel like you were nothing or unimportant or not valuable? Right? So, just like King David, we have a wonderful... the most important thing about us is the Lord is with us. Christian, the Lord is with us. The greatest thing that David had going for him. Look at this passage. What was the greatest thing that David had going for him? As we'll see, there comes times where it was the only thing that David had going for him was that the Lord was with him. So the greatest thing about David is the Lord is with him. Oh, have you noticed that you've got that going for you too? Maybe David would think something like this. Maybe you think something like this. The Lord is with me. What good is that doing me exactly? And look at David's life. You're like, hey, David, you are so fortunate. You have the Lord with you. David on a bad day might say, what good does that do exactly? Many people are living more comfortable lives than me, David would say. I've got powerful enemies. I'm a fugitive. I am slandered and betrayed. I'm poor. I'm hungry. My family is often in danger. I'm separated from my loved ones. But yeah, sure, the Lord is with me. That's great. What good is that? And friend, you may often wonder the same thing. The scripture says that God will never leave you or forsake you. Jesus says to you, I'm with you to the end of the age. But you say, okay, great, you're with me. Good, excellent. On the other hand, I'm sick. I'm lonely. I'm struggling. I'm being treated unfairly. Maybe you're even at death's door. But look at David. You say, David, what good is that doing you? The Lord is with you. David says, I will not finally be destroyed. Ultimately, I will win. The end of my story is going to be a good story. And friends, Christian brothers and sisters, can I encourage you with that this morning? That however dark this chapter of your life is, with Jesus Christ, with the Lord with you, the end of your story is going to be an epic one. It's going to be a wonderful, happy ending to the story. David could say, it may be hard right now because the Lord is with me. I am moving towards royal glory and honor. Ultimately, David is going to sit in the throne with glory and honor. And friend, there is Christian brother and sister, there is no power in all of this world that it will be able to stop you from arriving at that final destination where you are decked out in glory and honor. David could say, yeah, even on this hard day, all these hard things going on, the Lord is with me, and that means I have the joy of knowing him. And Christian, the more we get to know the Lord, the longer we walk with him, the more we learn about him, the more we rejoice in his gospel, the more, even on the hardest, darkest days, even at death's door, we'll be able to say, it's good to be me. I'm blessed. I'm fortunate. How happy I am to know him. So David, even in hard times, look, some of the most beautiful Psalms that David writes. Go read the book of Psalms this week. Some of the most beautiful Psalms that David writes, that we sing today even, were written at those very, very dark moments. In those dark moments, David had the sweetness of knowing the Lord. And then last, David might say, yes, it's hard. It's a hard path to walk, but the Lord is with me, and that means I have a life full of rich blessings. Who are we kidding here? Would anybody read this story and be like, if I had to be anybody in this story, I'd be King Saul? No. Would anybody read this story and be like, if I had to be somebody, I got to go with the Philistines. Got to be a Philistine. No. You read this story, I got to be David. David's life is going to be, even though it's got incredibly difficult valleys and sorrows and darkness, David's life is also going to have some unbelievable mountaintops and blessings. And I have yet to meet a Christian. I've yet to meet a Christian who's walked with Jesus for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years and said, no, it's been a dark, miserable journey the whole way. I'm glad I'm a Christian, I'm going to heaven, but it's just been a miserable, dark path all these many a year. Like, no, I've never met that. Everyone who's been a Christian, walked with Jesus for many years says there's been amazing times. There's been amazing times walking with Jesus. He's blessed me in such amazing ways. And then notice that like David's men, we are actually going to join him in getting victories. One of my favorite little characters that's going to emerge over the next few weeks. In this passage, you see them. They're just called David's men who are with him. And they're a faceless, nameless bunch for the most part. But David just got these guys who are hanging out with David, and they have a front row seat to witnessing David's greatness. And we're going to see how they're growing in faith. And they're actually experiencing the victories that David's winning. David's doing all the heavy lifting, and they just get to be there and get to be a part of it. And one of the things I want us to see is that as Christians, there's a sense which we say, the battle is the Lord's. Jesus wins the victory. I did nothing. He's the total champion, and I'm just a person who benefits from it. But the more you read the Bible, the more you find this. When Jesus wins the victory for us, what does he do? He pulls his people into action. We saw that with the battle against Goliath. Remember that? He fells the giant Goliath, and then all Israel rises up and rushes in to win the victory with him. In the same way, we as David's men, David, in every battle that he wins, his men are going to be right there experiencing the same thing. And we're going to experience the same thing. Well, what is Jesus up to in the world today? Scouring this polluted, unclean, Philistine world that we live in. And if you're on his team, if you're on Team Jesus, what is he calling you to do? To join with him in scouring. It was a great, now I got to be careful. I quoted the Lord of the Rings last week, but that was the movie. And now this week I'm going to quote from Lord of the Rings, the book. Completely different things. So it counts. It's okay. Great scene at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy books. That's not in the movies. And it's kind of a sad thing because if you've never read the books before and if you have seen the movies, it's this great surprise at the end. It's like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I didn't know this was in here. At the very end, the stories about these hobbits who go on this great adventure and to fight against evil. And really, they're hobbits. They're like this tall. Like, what do? Basically nothing, right? They basically just watch all these great heroes fight. And they're like David's men. They're just there watching this great thing happen against this great battle against evil. And the whole time they're out there like, oh, if we could just go home, back to our simple life, to our home in the Shire, their little homeland. And so at the end, you're like, oh, they're finally going to get home. It's going to be great. And you're reading like, wow, there's still a little bit of this book left. And they get to their homeland and they find that everything's been ruined. That their homeland has been taken over by what Tolkien calls a gang of ruffians. Ooh, ruffians. And the ruffians have taken over the Shire and they've just turned it into this miserable place. And there's no one coming to rescue the little hobbits. But they've been transformed. They're not normal hobbits anymore. They come in on their horses and with their swords, and they start a battle. And they scour. The chapter is called The Scouring of the Shire. This passage reminded me of because the word scouring. They scour the Shire, and they chase all the ruffians out. It's this amazing thing. Now, how did that happen? The whole point of it is they were transformed by having this front row seat to the real warriors fighting the real war, the real battles. So when they came home, it was just a cleanup operation. You may be overwhelmed with what's going on in your life right now. The battles you're facing in your family, at work, in our country, they may seem like sometimes the battles we have of good against evil, even your own battle against sin, sometimes can seem very overwhelming. But it's helpful if you remember that the real battle has been won. The victory is guaranteed. You're just doing a little scouring of the Shire. And those hobbits, they rush into battle fully confident because they say the battle's already won. This great line where this guy tries to stand in their way, and he's like, "Yeah, we run the Shire now," and they kind of run their mouth back at him. And little Frodo, he says this in response to him. He says, I see that you're behind the times in the news here. Much has happened. Your day is over, and for all other ruffians. The Dark Tower has fallen, and there is a king in Gondor. In other words, he's saying, you guys are behind the times here. You don't know what's going on. There's new developments. You're not in charge anymore. The world doesn't belong to you anymore. There's a king who's ruling, and we're his servants, and we're here to scour the world of folks like you. So let's ask the Lord to do that. Whatever corner of the world is our little shire, our little area of responsibility, our own hearts, our own lives, our own battle with sin, our own homes, friends, other relationships, our country, whatever part of responsibility we have there. Let's say, Lord, let me be part of your cleanup operation. I'm on Team Jesus. Let me be part of his battle to scour this world of evil, starting in my own heart. Let's pray together.